everybody today. I'm absolutely delighted to act as a moderator for this roundtable scenario, Vaccinate Your Business. An incredible story that has so many things that's going to come out of our hypothetical situation. I wish to acknowledge Michael Walls, the editor of Access News, and in particular, Catherine Hawes, the principal digital age lawyers company that has been supportive of this event today. In the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people today. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce our panel and to highlight the significant role they play in our community. And I will just simply go through them as I've got them listed here. And that is Daryl Jobson, Superintendent, New South Wales Police. Very warm welcome, Daryl. Thank you for being here. Catherine Hawes, the Principal Digital Age Lawyers. Thank you for your sponsorship and your position of being here. Turan DeWitt, the co-founder of TalkLink, a mental health directory and host of podcast Mental Health by TalkLink. To Lyle Gorman, the CEO of Evolve Housing and Director of Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. To Dale Corey, partner of KPMG, and of course myself, Dr. Jim Taggart, session moderator. Clearly, the last 3 years have taken an impact on all parts of society, whether it be economic, political, social, psychological, behavioural, a whole range of areas that have influenced people's lives. And behind the numbers of COVID are stories of real people dealing with and confronting the impact of COVID in their lives. And I've themed that down into looking at hopes and fears. And if you look at a number of reports, there seems to be themes that run through the whole area of the impact of COVID. And that deals with national security, the economy, healthcare, education, digital platforms and security, and of course, climate. And one of the big ticket items that has come through is looking at trust as it permeates through all of that, and in particular, the government at both the federal and state level, and the impact that that's having explicitly and implicitly on how our lives are being functioned. Let me paint the scenario. There's a couple called Scott and Kathy. They live in suburban Sydney, and they're aged approximately 57 and 56, respectively. They're both COVID vaccinated, and we're now talking about September 21. Kathy has built her successful hair salon over 20 years and has won awards for being a great leader in her salon. Her 2 IC, and that's Joan, works and can't wait to get back to her love and her work. She has made the conscious decision not to be vaccinated. Let's start with that and see where we go with regards to that. Catherine, I'm going to shoot straight to you now. As a lawyer, is there any legal implications and concepts that you think have arisen in just those short paragraphs of our hypothetical this morning?
Well, there's a number of them, and I think it's something that all business owners, including myself, who's also a business owner, are sort of grappling with, is, how, the vaccination issue in the workplace plays out. The one thing I would say to all business owners is that they do need to protect their business. So hairdressing is a very contact, you're close, transmission, could be quite easily, you've got touching of people and hair and what have you. So the risk of transmission is probably higher than, let's say, if they're going into, office works to pick up a cartridge, wear a mask, and they might be in there for 5 minutes. So the first thing is, the fact is that you've got an employee who isn't getting vaccinated. Now, at the moment, there's public health orders and there's protections, but what happens, 2 years time, and you've got an employee, or you may have an apprentice come in who doesn't want to be vaccinated. So when we look at this, I keep saying to business owners, look at it into WHS, your risk and your risk hierarchy. And what do you need to put into place in order to protect your business? Because the other thing is, and again, there's bills going through Parliament at the moment that want to make employers responsible if an employee gets sick. It hasn't become law. Okay, so that's one myth to debunk. But you still need, other areas where you need to ensure that your workplace is safe and your workers are kept safe. Now, if that means somebody has to be vaccinated, that might be the end result. It is a new world, because generally when we talk about work health and safety, we talk about protecting the individual. This is now protecting your other workers, your customers and your clients. Think about it from this. How many clients are you going to lose when they know that one of your staff is not vaccinated?
Thanks, Catherine. I'm going to shoot to Lyle in a minute, but I just want to take another step forward, because you've raised a number of issues for the individual and then the corporation or the business. So I want to read further our scenario. Cassie's other 8 stylists refuse to work if Joan is working. But Joan has, and because she's the key person, and a very strong and appears watertight employment contract with Cathy, and has no mention of the concept or term COVID. And she's entitled to a big payout if Cathy cancels that contract without due cause. Lyle, in your role, particularly with being a director of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, many thousands of businesses, what's going through your mind at the moment in relation to Catherine's comments and this very vexed and complex issue of vaccinated versus unvaccinated in the workplace?
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Catherine, for your insights. And I concur fully that a starting point is work health and safety. Obviously, there is a lack of clear direction from government at the moment. It's almost like they want to, in many arenas, push the decision-making back onto business. And then, your case study highlights significantly, and Catherine alluded to this too, what's the impact on business if Joan's clients leave the business? The other one that I'm getting confused with, I'm getting mixed messages, and if I talk about evolved housing for a minute rather than the chamber, Jim, by all means. We got a direction from DCJ, Department of Community and Justice, last night, and I've been onto them this morning saying that the government has directed that anyone who's the beneficiary of state government grants, so in social housing, we get grants from the government to house people in social housing accommodation. We've probably got about 2,500 tenants. And part of our contractual arrangement is that we're bound by policies that DCJ may have from time to time and that may change from time to time. Now, the government last night has put out 5 bullet points saying that it's an obligation of us, because we're dealing with vulnerable parts of our community, whether it's elderly, whether it's aged, or whether it's health related, the largest percentage of our staff have to be vaccinated. Out of our 130, we've got 16 who don't want to. So we're working through this as we speak. But Fair Work also has some thoughts around this too, Catherine, and you're probably aware of those 4 tiers they've spoken about. Tier 1 being whether you've got direct interaction with high risk. Well, in the hairdressing salon, you don't know, I guess, and the whole gamut of community and consumers there, from elderly to young and so on. Tier 2 under Fair Work is around close contact with people who are vulnerable to health risk. Well, how do you assess the health risks of a client in a hairdressing salon? I don't believe you're really in a position to do so. And then possible interaction with the public is tier 3. And of course, minimal is tier 4. So you've got this complex situation of government not mandating it unless in specific areas, say around aged care. For us, we're frontline. 70% of our staff deal with social housing tenants on a daily basis. So we're frontline. So we're at high risk, both, by the way, to protect our tenants, and then part of the whole question around your workplace scenario in the hairdressing salon is not just about protecting the business owner or Jane, but it's also about protecting the customer and the consumer. So we've got this confluence of information from work health and safety, which says you've got to take reasonable and practicable steps to prevent the spread of COVID to all of those people I just mentioned, all the stakeholders. You've got fair work, and then you've got government not mandating. So from a business perspective, there's a lot of confusion, and we've got a board meeting next week about this, as to how do we best manage this, our advice to our 60,000 members. And it probably can't go much deeper than what Catherine has spoken about, making them aware of the various action regulations and getting them to try and best interpret them in their own workplace as they can. Until government come out with stronger views, certainly I would have thought hairdressing is in a very close contact environment, as Catherine said, and would probably fall into tier 1 or tier 2, which puts Jane under tremendous pressure. The other question we're battling is we're going to have a return to work at some point. We've got 16 staff who don't want to be vaccinated for a variety of reasons, and none of those are medical exempt. So how do we manage that in our workplace? Do we terminate staff? And there's a few. We got something from Hall and Wilcox, Catherine, which I'm happy to share with you if you like offline this week about there have been 3 legal challenges at the moment. One was with Good Start in the childcare sector, for example, and the staff member lost the case. So the complexity is, as you'd all say, is enormous. But the clarity of advice we can give to business owners and people is not much better to make them aware of the various actions that are in place at the moment. And they've got to make a call. And that work health and safety one, Catherine, you'll know the words better than me, but you've got to take reasonable and practicable steps to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And then it talks about a range of dimensions within that, Jim, which I can talk about later, because I probably just spoke a little bit too long then.
No, not at all. Lyle, it's been extremely informative. I forgot to tell you, Dale, that Scott and Kathy and the rest of the team is a client of yours at KPMG. You've spoken to Lyle, you've spoken to Catherine and obtained information and so on. What are you going to say to them at the phone call at 2 o'clock today?
Look, I think it's really hard. You've got to adopt a really sort of empathetic approach to not only the business owner but also to the position that the staff are going through. Fundamentally, businesses have to continue. I think it's particularly hard to reshape a business around a particular individual. The lack of clarity that business owners are facing at the moment makes this decision-making process incredibly difficult. But stripping it back, I look at what is going to allow the Australian economy to continue, what is going to allow small businesses to continue, and each and every business owner needs to make the decision that's going to be in the business's best interest and allow them to continue. And so, from our perspective, I think you've got to say, are we going to put the entire business at risk and sort of 8 other employees and their livelihoods if there's no sort of practical and negotiated settlement? Or are we going to have to, unfortunately, part ways with our best hairdresser in the interest of serving the community and in the interest of maintaining the livelihood of 8 other families? It's a terrible dilemma to face, and no doubt will create some moral hazard at some level, but it's very hard. I'd imagine it'd be very hard for an organization. You can take KPMG for an example. How is KPMG going to deal with this? It's going to be particularly difficult. We are no more advanced than the hairdressing salon in terms of developing a policy. We've got some very deep thinking happening at the moment on what that policy is going to be. But it's a very complex battleground, and so an entrepreneur running their own business They're not part of a corporation because they've chosen to be their own boss. And I think they've got to make some tough decisions, unfortunately.
Let me ask you this question, Dale, and that's a question without notice, and I'd ask everyone to think about this. COVID has created incredible challenges for many people. And yet, if you look at the balance sheet and profit and loss of a number of businesses, have done very well. So there's been opportunity. Let me paint this scenario as a subset of what we've been discussing. Joan has decided to leave. She is now going to start up her own hair salon only for unvaccinated. How silly is that?
It's hard for me to say, Jim, whether it's silly or not. I think people are going to have their very own deeply entrenched personal views about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And Joan will find support. There's no doubt that Joan will find support, and she will find potentially a niche in the market, and potentially she'll do very well out of pursuing that particular niche. You know, people have reasons, whether they are health reasons or religious beliefs or whatever the view around vaccine development is. And there's more than one person, and they can potentially build some support around that.
I agree with that. Catherine, what are your thoughts at the moment with regards to the comments made by our colleagues?
Okay, so I just think in terms of the last point about her starting up her own business for unvaccinated, and I'm sure Daryl's probably got some words around how that may breach a few of the laws, but also who's going to lease to her? I mean, if it's going to be a hairdressing salon in a shopping centre area, you know, are clauses within leases going to now be that you have to do this? Like, you know, how far is it going to be like, you know, if you want to set up a nightclub, or you've got to have certain types of licenses before you go in? Is it going to become part of the licensing regime? So I think Joan might have a few other issues in relation to, if there is an outbreak, is she up for paying for the deep clean for the whole centre? I mean, this is the other thing. It's not just that there's, you know, a source of infection there. Then who's liable then to pay for the cleanup? Plus, she's probably in breach of her employment contract by taking clients, but that, you know, is probably a subset to things around COVID. But, you know, it's not just, you know, the other people don't, and then you've got the mental health and looking after the rest of your workers. I mean, knowing that somebody else is not vaccinated that you happen to be working with, what does that, I mean, do they have a claim against Kathy?
I'm going to ask you that as a question, given your legal background. Could it arise a civil matter there?
Well, you know, if they contract it, then, you know, you would have to demonstrate that you have taken all precautions within the workplace. That in itself is going to be an issue. You know, so I think one of the things that I keep saying to business owners is, over the last 18 months, a lot of our decision making has been overtaken by governments. But I think we've got to come back, you know, let's take COVID and the idea of personal out of it. If you were operating a warehouse, you would ensure that everybody comes in with their right, you know, protective equipment. If somebody says, sorry, I don't want to wear it, what would you do? You wouldn't let them in. Okay, so I think, you know, business owners need to start thinking in those terms around, you know, if it's a car hire company, all your employees have to drive licenses. If you're working with children, you have to have a working with children check. So is this just becoming another part of being in employment? So I think maybe, you know, take the emotion or the fact that, you know, it is a vaccine. I mean, we do ask other people to do other things or have other licenses and skills. So, you know, maybe that's how business owners now need to start thinking about it.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Daryl, good morning.
Morning, Jim.
Lovely to have you with us here this morning, and thank you for your time. We acknowledge how busy you are, particularly at the moment. Thank you for the work that you do for our community. Daryl, you've just received a phone call that a number of people have suggested that they are vaccinated and have gone to the salon to get their hair done. They're so excited. A disruption takes place because they're questioning the authenticity of them having being vaccinated. What's your process when you're sending two police there to investigate that ruckus? What happens?
Well, Jim, first and foremost, what we're about is obviously ensuring the peace and good order in the community. So we would be looking to manage and quell and disrupt any of that activity, and so we can then sort through issues. But essentially, we would be governed by whatever the public health order may be, or whatever the law may be at that time, which would determine then what our role would be. So if there was a reason for us to under an order or under a law to investigate a potential breach of legislation or an order, well, that is something that we would strive to do based on that hypothetical. But essentially, it will be challenging, no question about that. But you know, realistically, we want to be there. We want to make sure that there's some calm there and go about an investigation process, subject to whatever the prevailing order or laws may be at that time.
And I think that's a very good response, in the sense that you'll be governed by what the legislation is. It won't be an interpretation. It'll be legislative. There'll be a health order, and there are appropriate steps to take place in instigating those particular matters.
Yeah, Jim, what we should highlight in the current day is that we have the vast majority of the community that come on this journey with us in relation to compliance. So we're really talking about the minority is where the challenge.
Yes.
But you know, we should acknowledge the community and what they've done and what they've endured and coming on this journey with us to get us to where we are. And obviously, we're only weeks away from some better outcomes for community.
Thank you for sharing that. Rowan, mental health has never been more front and centre over the last 12 months than now. What's your experiences, and particularly in the context of what might be going through the minds of the staff, and also to Scott and Kathy, but particularly Kathy, because we'll get to Scott later with regards to his situation. But what's your take on it?
Yeah, Jim, I think you hit the nail on the head when you put the word fear in the context of the scenario. For me, this conversation happens on two levels. There's the cognitive level, where we talk about policy, legislation, finances. And then there's the much deeper level, which is the emotional level of the employees and what everyone else is experiencing. And I think Dale talked about empathy before, and I think everyone here would probably agree with that, but there's probably just call for a pause to reflect on the empathy we need to feel for people. People are scared. They're scared of losing their jobs. They're scared of getting COVID. They're scared of the vaccine. They're scared of what the vaccine will mean for them personally in their lives and in their community. We're seeing rates of domestic violence increase. We're seeing rates of alcohol and drug dependencies increase. The statistics and data is telling us psychological distress in the community is significantly increasing. We're hearing from all the support lines and from private clinicians that they are in high demand. There are wait times that are extremely long. People are scared. And now would be a great time to emphasize to the employees in this fictitious scenario, but also broader, that Australia is a country where we've got extremely well-trained clinicians. There are excellent crisis lines. These are really good resources that we should be encouraging both members of staff, family, friends to be using. For some large organizations, KPMG, for example, they would have employee assistance programs. Many employees may not even know that these resources exist. So I think part of the conversation is when those resources are available, emphasizing to staff that there is support, and that is covered in part by the employer. Australia's got an excellent framework for mental health care support through your GP. We are seeing those resources are stretched, so we can talk about that on our platform. We see a lot of movement and a lot of behaviour, Jim, and we see that people are facing long wait times, and our clinicians are connecting with a lot of people and resolving part of that problem. But people are scared, and I think at its very root, you can't have meaningful momentum forward and resolve issues if you're dealing with someone in a heightened emotional state. The first thing you want to do is you want to address that. And if employers can do anything to help resolve that, I think that's probably one of the first steps you'd want to take.
So if I could ask you this, we said previously that both Scott and Kathy are clients of Dale, and he's made a phone call to you because you're a professional person in his network. What would you be saying to Dale other than what you've just said in terms of the specificity of things that you would provide? How would you go about that?
Yeah, great question. So our specific role in what we do is we're a tech platform where we connect clinicians with people seeking support. So we're not directly clinicians ourselves. So we might ask some questions around what they are struggling with, what they need support with, but we're ultimately gatekeepers to try and connect them in with the appropriate resources. So Jim, that might mean calling Lifeline or directing them to Lifeline if there's an acute suicide situation. And that's probably the highest end. Or it might mean finding someone in their community locally or someone online with expertise in the particular concern that they have to help them resolve that in a timely manner. We had a phone call yesterday and someone said that they'd been on Lifeline waiting for 4 hours to speak with an operator. And a lot of the clinicians on our platform also work for Lifeline. A lot of the crisis resources right now are absolutely stretched to their limits. Psychologists and counsellors are talking about huge waiting lists. It's not uncommon for us to hear that there's a waiting list of 4 to 5 months to see some clinicians.
I'm staggered when you say those figures. I want to shoot to Lyle. Lyle, from an Evolve Housing point of view, the mental stress of some of these employees of Kathy.
So there's mental stress on all of the stakeholders, Jim, from our perspective. You listen to the folk on the Zoom talk about the increase in domestic violence, increase in mental health issues, the increases in both attempted suicide and suicide are all real and growing on a very unfortunate and regular basis. To go to Rowan's point, I'll connect with Rowan offline after this about the scarcity of support services available in the broader community at the moment. On a personal basis, we've been looking for some solutions for some things, and 6 to 8 to 9 months away, some of the waiting list times and so on. So what we've got to do as an organisation, therefore, and we do this on a very regular basis with our staff, is look at ways we can connect around mental health support issues, if you like, without necessarily focusing on mental health itself. So we've had all sorts of weekly, today's, I don't know whether you know, it's World Gratitude Day, for example. So we've got to hook up this afternoon with all of our staff around what are they grateful for, and they're all going to do a piece of work around that. We've had about 6 or 7 different themes in the last 6 or 7 weeks just to bring people together to let them know we care and they're supported. We've given the 11th of October as a wellbeing day for staff. We don't want to see you work. In fact, you can't come to work in any form. So working from home as we are, but everything is down. Please take the time to look at yourself and reflect on self and others and how can we best support each other. But look, it's a critical issue. And I think Rowan sort of sums it up very well. And he says the broader support services just aren't there at the minute. And I'm concerned about Lifeline, Rowan, on a 4-hour wait there. But I know in other areas where there's psychiatrists, psychologists, or just general support staff, the waiting lists are unbelievably long. And what happens then to people in need? Where do they go? And sadly, we see this increase in suicide again. And I mean, that's one of my lifelong goals is to make sure there's never a young person again who takes their life. And Jim, you and I have discussed that offline before. Not that I wish it on anyone, but certainly young people.
Lyle, thank you for sharing those really deep reflections. And I know the concern you have for all your members in the chamber. Daryl, let's just shoot back and have a look at the police and all the ancillary and stakeholders in that organisation. It must be a concern for you before we move on with regards to ensuring the mental health of your staff.
Yeah, look, absolutely, Jim, and this is something that we are aware of, and we've got our support mechanisms in place, whether it be our on-call sites, whether it be the employee assistance program, but also our peer support officers. And even in my command this morning, we have parades at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. But I had one of my peer support officers down there just to remind everybody that those services are available. So yes, we are acutely aware of the stressors that this is putting on all first responders, but just having those support mechanisms in place, valuing our employees for the great work that they are doing. Because ultimately, in my context, the work that we're doing is, I've got no doubt, is suppressing the spread of the virus by enforcing our Operation Stay at Home.
Yep.
And obviously being out there proactively tasking into the community to make sure that the orders are being adhered to. So look, you know, we're proud of the work that we're doing because we know we are making a difference. But as you say, at the same time, we need to be aware of our first responders and provide those support mechanisms.
Darryl, thank you again. And the reason I raised that question with you within the context of the hypothetical is that your staff are human beings with their own matters to deal with personally, and they leave home, come home. And unfortunately, some of them don't come home, and that's such a tragedy. But, you know, they're caught in the unexpected, and yet they're to go out and defend and look after us. So, again, on behalf of all of us here today and to Principal of Digital Age Lawyers, Catherine Hawes, thank you so much. And again, I reiterate the authenticity of my comments as an echo of all of us here today. I want to move on a little bit more with regards to the story and the hypothetical. But before I do that, Catherine, your thoughts up until now, because do you feel we've given Cathy, and we've not brought other players into the fold yet, but has Cathy got some course of action? She's spoken to her accountant. There's been a lot of people wanting to support Dale. What's your thoughts from a legal perspective and a summary of this part of the journey?
Yeah, look, I suppose what I'm saying is to all business owners, and if I was advising Cathy, is to reframe her thoughts and her discourse. I think, Jim, you were right, and Ron said the same thing about the word fear. I think a lot of business owners are fearful that they're going to do the wrong thing. They're going to get a fine. They're going to do this. You know, they're going to be closed down. So instead, maybe what we need to do is not worry about what we don't know, but let's focus on what we can do and do know. So my advice would be for her to know the rules, have a look at the public health orders, see which criteria she falls in. If she's not sure, then do discuss it with, you know, her lawyer, and, you know, see if she's got her COVID plan in place. Does it need improving? Review her contracts. So if her employment contracts are outdated, her supply contracts, have a customer charter. So maybe look at what you can do as a proactive thing, rather than, oh, I don't know if I do it, I'll be wrong. I think let's let go of that and look at what we can do to be sure, because I do think it's that fear of doing wrong. I don't think anybody wants to do the wrong thing, although Darryl will probably say a few in society will. But generally, I think business owners really do want to do the right thing.
And Catherine, thanks for that summary, because if you look at the composition of our colleagues today and the stories that they're telling, I think Scott and Cathy, in particular Cathy at the moment, has been given great information from her accountant, from her lawyer, from Lyle in his capacity as the custodian of 60,000 businesses, to Ruan talking about mental health and the individual impact that has on the individual and then the organisation. And of course, Darryl saying that we've got people trying to enforce to make sure that we put in place those laws that we're bound to do by what we do. So I think that's been an excellent summary of helping Cathy at this point. And the final thing I'll say before moving off to Cathy, in my humble opinion, trying to summarise what's been said, Cathy, in my humble opinion, has an obligation to be informed. She has to be proactive rather than wait for people to come to her. It's her business, it's her things. All of us need to go looking for and become better educated about the world we live in. Let's put in a couple of little extra and additional comments. The couple's daughter, Liz, is vaccinated. Unfortunately, she's just split up from her partner, Jeff. But like many things, Darryl will say, we don't know what happens behind closed doors. The splitting up came about a number of things, but particularly domestic violence and the accusations made. She has been forced to move home to a 3-bedroom home with Scott and Kathy. She's now moved back from Melbourne to Sydney, and she has 2 children, their grandchildren, 3 and 6. And homeschooling over the last 3 months has become an incredible issue for all parties. Rowan, walk us through the tensions and the potential issues that you see in that relationship there.
Yeah, Jim, it just reflects a fairly realistic view of what many people would be experiencing right now. We're obviously seeing that there's a huge amount of inter-family pressure there. That's fairly consistent with what the statistics are telling us for domestic abuse. I'm sure Darryl's got some views on this as well, and perhaps some of the other panel members, but there was a recent poll that indicated a 67% increase in new clients for agencies that support domestic abuse. We're seeing people are removed from their communities, their sporting groups, their religious institutions. People don't have outlets like what they usually would in the form of exercise and sports in gyms or other sporting facilities. And all of this is building up together with the fear and the uncertainty we've spoken about earlier. That's just bringing people to a boiling point. And we're seeing this boil over in protests and in fear-based campaigns, lack of trust for the government, for our agencies, for our institutions. It's just a very uncertain time. And unfortunately, a lot of this is boiling over into families. And we're certainly seeing that across the board in all of our support institutions.
What do you do with the children? How do they fit into this? And what are those critical aspects you would be, if we look at it, Liz, the daughter, has come to see you. She's embarrassed about her own personal life. She's embarrassed about moving back home, her friends, all of that psychology going on in her, but she's really concerned about her children. What would you be talking and asking her questions about there?
Yeah, Jim, and I guess the children just represent the vulnerable component of society, and that extends, children, people who are aged, people who are part of minorities, and people who have disabilities, and they are the most vulnerable part of society, and we have to make sure that they are protected. So in the first instance, we want to make sure that they're safe, that there's no immediate risk there. We do hear of this partner who may potentially not be in a healthy space mentally, and we'd want to make sure that they're not going to take matters in their own hands and perhaps create some immediate impact on the family and on the children. So we'd want to make sure that the kids are safe. And if they're not, we'd want to escalate it through the mechanisms that are in place to make sure that they are protected. On the longer term, I think the lockdowns probably just make this whole situation so much more complex. From our perspective, we'd want to make sure that everyone in that community has the mental health support. And if that means that they need to speak with a counsellor, we're seeing a lot of people draw on online counselling to an extent that we've never seen before. And the lockdowns are an obvious reason for that. So learning how to manage the change in situation, the pressures of the family, the relationship breakdown. There's a few other themes that you'll touch on in a moment, which will just add fuel to that fire. Again, we've got amazing resources in Australia. We've just got to make sure we can connect people with available resources who could help all the stressed and stretched out people in that family unit with some coping strategies and methods to deal with it. I think perhaps the most important part is early intervention. The longer we leave these situations, the more inflamed they'll get, and the more the risk of it escalating. So we'd want to nip things in the bud, get people connected as soon as they start finding that there's issues.
Can I ask you this question then, Rowan? You know Dale, you've spoken to Dale, that is the accountant for Scott and Kathy. He mentions to you that their daughter is moving home because of personal matters, and he's concerned about that environment. We'll let other things come up in a moment, but that environment, what do you do? Do you instigate discussion? What happens when you're giving a little bit of information? Do you suggest that Liz, the daughter, go and talk to the police, go and talk to Commander?
Yeah, Jim, that's a great question. I've got to be very specific here. In our capacity as connectors, we want to facilitate connection with mental health professionals. So that's what we do. Our questions would be to filter out any acute and immediate risks. I think from a broader perspective, this is ultimately a scenario for us to have these broader conversations, right? There's a level of ownership that everyone needs to take at this time to check in with people. We just had Are You OK Day. Mm-hmm. I think that's within businesses, within family units, when people are stressed and wound up to the extent that we're seeing and the emotions are rising to this point, it's more important than ever to have these conversations, to be vulnerable and to engage with the available resources.
I think that's really excellent. Dale, would you have implemented Are You OK Day for Kathy and Scott and their staff? Is that important?
Sorry, Jim was just struggling to unmute. Yep, absolutely.
Is that part of your mandate, part of your operations in the sense of consciousness?
Yeah, look, and so I think when we're looking at a few things inside of a business, employee health and well-being, sort of the cultural aspects of the business, things like Are You OK Day are important. I think particularly at this time, it is really important that business owners and organizations invest deeply in what their staff are going through and what their stakeholders are going through. You know, the initiatives that are brought through Are You OK Day can have overwhelmingly positive outcomes. And it actually is just a really short question, which might make the difference in somebody's day. It might make the difference in somebody's life. So absolutely looking holistically at businesses and how businesses need their employees to be productive. It's a two-way relationship. You know, the business owners have to invest in those employees at the same time.
Yeah, thank you, Dale. Catherine, Liz has moved home. She's brought her children. What legal matters and potentialities do you think may start to surface in this very now, as I think Rowan said, this more tense environment with 3 bedrooms, homeschooling, and so on? What do you see any legal matters that need to be discussed and have dialogue?
Well, look, there's obviously, you know, maybe a potential family law matter, but what I'd also like to touch on is if Liz works and is able to work at home, how does she then get back into the workplace? You know, if she's moved from Melbourne to Sydney, and this has happened to a lot of people over the last 18 months. The other thing is that, you know, how do you now get staff back into offices or routines? Because, you know, technically, if you are doing childcare, you should have, if you are looking after children, you shouldn't be at work, even if you are working at home. Okay, it's meant to be that you have childcare in place. So how do we, you know, we've sort of unwritten a lot of rules that are still in place because of COVID. So if Liz needs to now get back into the workplace, if the kids need to get, how do we do that? And how do we start complying back with the idea of WHS at home and the home office. I mean, yes, working from home is great, but it's actually also still working. And I think the other issue we've got is here is poor Kathy now with extra people in the house, trying to restart a business that's been completely closed down. It's probably got debt as well. And now she's got, 3 extra people in the house as well. So, from a legal point of view, it's about, when people are back in the office, how we then manage working from home, and how we put those rules to ensure that it's not just, if a kid's sick, I'm going to work at home today. Well, no, you're taking time to look after the child. So I think, there's going to be a lot of pushback on some of those things.
Thank you, Catherine. Lyle, clearly the microcosm of Scott and Kathy and the children and so on moving back home, that would be an area that causes some concern and for dialogue with members. I mean, with 60,000 members, Kathy and Scott's situation is not isolated.
No, look, it's not isolated, Jim, in any shape or form, and that, as is the increasing pressure we're seeing on housing stress, which can bring about that scenario in another form. The knock-on effect of that being homelessness, the number of people couch surfing at the moment, which is not that dissimilar to this example in some ways, because they can't afford to live in their own right. And again, I'm seeing that both in business and small business. When you understand the small business, their funding typically comes from a mortgage on their home, and the small business is suffering financially. The housing stress kicks in, then the domestic abuse kicks in, the alcoholism, all those sorts of things kick in. So we're seeing that in many forms, and it's providing immense challenge. The other area, and I noticed in the chat there's some talk there about the culturally and linguistically diverse communities, and Daryl, you're probably aware we had a lockdown in Blackdown a few weeks ago, and the Evolved House building was fully locked down, and one of the reasons for the spread within that environment was the number of people who were living in very confined spaces, largely either due to financial stress or equally to cultural backgrounds, where many of our ethnic related families actually live in very small communities, if you like, and in the same house quite often. So it's posing significant financial challenges to small businesses, continuing to exacerbate mental health issues. And I think an area that would be interesting for you to pick up in the chat if you get a chance, Jim, would be this whole extrapolating this out into another world where language, English isn't the first language, where there are cultural and other differences that help people or guide people to make decisions, particularly in this case, not so much Scott and Kathy and so on, but around vaccination and different things like that. So it's a massive issue in both my chamber role and my CEO of Evolved Housing role.
So it's an excellent question and thought, Lyle. It's one that I'm happy to explore, and we might just do that right now. And I'll tell you why, because we gave the hypothetical that there are 8 stylists. And to have 8 stylists, they come from very different cultural backgrounds and so on. So what you're talking about has real relevance. Can we continue that discussion?
Yeah, we sure can, because it does bring unique needs. There's probably people on the Zoom better equipped than I, and I imagine Rowan would see a lot of this in his space, for example, too, where the challenges that we're talking about, and I know you've used some names there that are reasonably typically Anglo-Saxon, for want of a better word, but a broader contemplation is to understand better the needs of culturally and linguistic diverse groups, because there are many of them. I remember when I was building the Wanderers, we found out there was 187 different languages in Western Sydney, for example. So there's a broader contemplation here.
All right, Lyle, thank you for that. I will move along that vein. Ryan, can you respond to Lyle's thoughts and process here, because it truly is very important to consider.
Yeah, excellent question, Lyle. At TalkLink, we believe that people should ultimately take responsibility for their mental health. And of course, we're not talking about acute moments when people are in crisis. We're talking about moments of pressure similar to this. So to that extent, what we're focused on doing is enabling people to find those professionals who can speak certain languages or are familiar with certain cultural identities. So our platform structure, the whole architecture of how we facilitate that search is so that if you're interested in speaking to someone who is familiar with another language or even another religious orientation, you can find them. And I think, you know, as we move forward, there's already so much distrust in institutions. I suspect part of the solution to this particular problem will be to really lean into the distributed nature of the private network that we have. In Australia, we have clinicians who are trained and experienced from all different walks of life, speaking all different languages, familiar with all different religions and persuasions. And we really need to lean into that and leverage that existing resource. And our role, the gap here, is in connecting that with people. So I think that's really the opportunity and the piece of the puzzle that we're specializing in.
I think that's really excellent, because I now want to ask Daryl that, because Daryl and I previously have had conversation when Daryl was Commander of Cumberland, a massive geographic area with very diverse backgrounds and cultural territories within that. The police forces tried to be very active in that role to help the Cathys and Scotts of this world. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that, please, Daryl?
Oh, look, certainly, and again, I'm not in southwestern Sydney at the moment, but look, the leadership around our civic leadership as police, but also engaging with our community leaders has been quite exceptional, and that's one of the main ways that we can connect with the community. The messaging from health, again, just scanning the various websites and what have you, getting the key messaging in the different languages, and connecting with the community in as many ways that we can has been critical. And the evidence is there. We're seeing the uptakes in the vaccinations in the area. So the evidence is there in relation to the messaging getting through and the community getting on board. So it's fantastic what police and other stakeholders working with the community leaders, what we can achieve when we all work together.
Thank you, Daryl. Lyle, thanks for that question, because it's really important that is then becomes universal, because that is critical in trying to bring some sense to solving that. So thank you very much for that. And Ryan, thank you for your insights into that. Let's move on.
Jim, can I just add a very quick comment that as employers, it's very important for us to understand that those differences, those cultural and other differences, and some of our policies and how we best frame those and implement those need to have really deep consideration of those, the very broad needs of our employees.
And again, thank you, because that's a very powerful reflection on this scenario coming through. Let's go back to our scenario, vaccinate your business, and add a couple of more curly aspects. Lisa's ex-partner, Jeff, is clearly an anti-vaxxer. He's made that very public. He's attended rallies when he was in Melbourne. And to add salt to the wounds, he has berated his ex-partner on Facebook for being vaccinated. He still very much wants her to be with him and the children, and he comes to drive to Sydney, and he sits outside the car, in his car at Scott and Kathy's home, and wants to make his presence very well known. Catherine, one of the grandparents, her parents, contacts you, is concerned about him sitting in the car. What do you do?
Well, first off, I'd probably tell him to ring the police in terms of.
But he's very violent. He's very violent. I mean, yeah. I can ring the police, but I know that's going to be a problem later.
Well, but that's there is nothing from a legal point of view. If he is threatening, berating her on Facebook, those become police matters. Okay, in terms of and this is where a lot of people misunderstand the magic wand that lawyers, we don't have it. we rely a lot on the police to really assist some of our clients in these situations to ensure that they are safe. Yes, you know, we could run off to the family court, but you know, you're looking at updeed delays and it may already be too late at that point. So in terms of him sitting outside in the car, you know, he's demanding to see children. He's probably already breached a number of, you know, rules by even driving from Melbourne to Sydney with closed borders at the moment. He's not quarantining. He's not following the public health. You know, yes, you know, there's a family law issue there, but, you know, it is also, you know, the fact that it would become a police matter.
So who rings the police? You do, or Liz, or the mum and dad?
At times I've done both, you know, particularly if it's been, you know, where there's a serious issue, you know, there's threatening to kidnap children. You know, we've always had a good relationship with the police to assist us. The problem is at the moment is that the police can only protect. They can't enforce any orders because there aren't any family law orders. Lots of people ring the police, and Daryl's probably find this over the years, asking them to go and recover children. The New South Wales Police can only do that if, you know, there's a family court order, and they're given authority to do it through the federal. So, you know, it really is important that Liz go and get some family law advice and go and get some orders to protect both her and the children.
Yes, but that could take what? How long would that? How's that going to? I mean, Liz knows the potency of this person.
Yep.
And technically, he's just sitting there. He's done a couple of things. A bit silly. I'll go to Daryl in a moment. But how long's the process going to take to get an order or something like that?
Look, the family court does have what we call it, you know, an urgency line. You know, these would be given priority. The problem is that it's an overstretched resource, to say the least, and even more so during COVID, with the number of family breakdowns, the number of issues that have come about. So, you know, it wouldn't be the quickest, but they are certainly triaging matters where there is, you know, safety concerns for the children.
Okay, Catherine, on instruction from the parents and Liz, you've had a conversation. You've rung Daryl. Daryl, what do you do?
It's certainly something that we would be interested in. Domestic violence has always been a strong focus of the New South Wales Police Force.
Mm.
COVID and the consequences of COVID, we're very heightened in our awareness in relation to the stressors in community. So yes, his behaviours are concerning very much. It's certainly a conversation that we would want to have with Liz and extrapolate what's going on, what the backstory is, background information. Is there a history of domestic violence? Find out more about that. But we just want to see whether or not there's those fears, whether she has fears for her safety. But certainly concerned that there could be some stalking, there could be some intimidation, the harassment at play, not to mention actual violence. So certainly something we'd be looking at. If we do have grounds, we would be looking at taking legal action, or at the very least, an apprehended domestic violence order to put things in play to protect Liz in these circumstances. And if there is evidence there that there is an offence committed, well, we then would take stronger action in the form of an arrest, putting the matter before the court, and also looking at bail conditions based on risk. So certainly there are those levers that we can pull, whether it be bail, whether it be the ADVO situation, where we can put those things in place for the protection of our victims or persons in need of protection.
Thank you, Daryl. I forgot to tell you that the 6-year-old wants to see him.
And again, these are things that, you know, if we are there to investigate, get the information, it's unlikely that we would facilitate that type of thing, because first and foremost, we are there to ascertain what the risk is and what we need to do based on the information available. So again, we're not there to sort of broker deals between the parties.
Great.
Certainly are there to investigate and take things very seriously because we know what the consequences of DV can be, and they can be catastrophic. And we need to make sure that we're making the right decisions every time for DV and for good reason.
Rowan, Kathy has rung you very concerned about Liz. She is not eating. A whole range of things are not happening. She's really concerned about Jeff quasi-stalking her, intimidating her and doing those things. Kathy has rung you. How do you get to talk to Liz? What do you do to try and help her? Because she's becoming weak in a whole range of areas.
Yeah, I think that there's, Jim, two parts of this conversation. The first is the acute, the actual risk, the immediate danger, and the second is the psychological distress. So again, we can't speak to the first part, but we certainly can support with the psychological distress. There are some clinicians on TalkLink who are real experts with dealing with these very specific scenarios. Some have even had their own personal experiences in domestic abuse situations, and they've spoken about how disorienting some of those dynamics can be, and how confusing some of those manipulation tactics can make the person on the other end of it feel. You're torn in this dynamic because, you know, at one point perhaps you did love this person, and there is this biological link with the children. I mean, these are very complex scenarios. The only other observation I would have is, we know from the data that psychological distress is increasing directly in link with, or in sync with, the lockdowns. As people are getting locked down, they're getting isolated from their communities. They're losing avenues to expend energy and frustration, like sporting communities within religious institutions. And we do, at the same time, see a step down of psychological distress when the lockdowns ease. So I hope that there's some measure of good news in the pipeline for everyone to that extent. There's a hope that once the lockdowns ease, we might see some of that pressure release a little bit, and hopefully that plays out in some of these scenarios.
Thank you, Rowan. Dale, we're going to move on in a moment because you're the main culprit. You're their accountant, you see. So I'm coming back to you. Kathy's very concerned. Cash flows has become very difficult for a whole host of reasons. We're going to introduce Kathy's partner in a moment, and work hasn't been very well for him as a self-employed plumber. She's asked you that and could you help her arrange a $100,000 loan as a withdrawal facility against her home. They own the home. They've paid that off and so on. But this situation has caused short-term cash flows and so on. We've preliminarily spoken to the bank and they don't see any real problem. You're starting to understand more and more what's happening in their life. How do you talk to them?
What's very important, Jim, is to get them to work with us and understand how that money will be put to use. If it genuinely is going to be sort of a short-term bridging facility, or
yeah, but Dale, sorry to interrupt. I'm waiting for the COVID rules to come out. I'm really stretching. We're living hand to mouth. You know, poor old mate Scott. He's hardly worked, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I just need 50,000 now. I'm trying to convince you, just 50,000. And so on against the house.
I think the first thing we'd do, Jim, is we'd point them to the range of government support, state and federal government support, which is available. Excellent. And help them to secure that as sort of the first base. And then if this extra $50,000 or $100,000 is needed to reinvigorate the business, we would urge them, or we would support them in doing some analysis around that. We don't. The one thing we'd caution them against is getting into a cycle of debt where they have no prospect of paying that debt down, potentially losing their assets, escalating the stress and sort of mental health impacts on everybody. I think there's some terrific support that the government is offering at the state and federal level. We should absolutely explore those and try and secure those in the first instance.
Can I just say, Dale, thank you for that. And that's a really good takeout for Lyle and his 60,000 members, because what happens, you can always find money. You just have to pay for it. there's always a price to get money. And I think people think because they own their home or a percentage of it, cash flow is tight, we can put that up. Someone will lend you money against that asset, particularly if it's unencumbered. So that raises a whole range of issues in the agony with regards to mental issues, their daughter and the grandchildren and so on. So thank you. So good planning, find out what's out there to try and alleviate that. Would you be talking to Kathy, and Scott preliminary? Would you be just having a phone call, or would you be reactionary?
Yeah, no, we absolutely do get on the front foot and engage with a wide range of advisors. We've found over the last sort of 24 months, we've worked particularly closely with lawyers and solicitors. We do our absolute best. Like, say, for example, Kathy needs to vary her lease. It's not something that I would do as a business advisor, but would work really closely with Catherine to understand what the opportunities for Kathy to vary that lease would be. We would work directly with them as a couple. We need to understand the family's position, the family situation, because I think one thing that is abundantly clear, Jim, is the impacts of COVID are not limited to individuals. Mm-hmm. The impacts are spread across families and across communities. And so in advising one party, we would want to know and understand the position of the significant other.
And can I just say, it was a point that I was just looking at my notes. One of the interesting things is they're talking about these interlinkages with Kathy, with her 8 stylists. They've got families and a whole range of other things. So what now becomes is this whole mix of people. When Lyle talks about 60,000 members, that could be 2 million people directly and indirectly related in relation to that. Or when Rowan talks to, a person with a particular matter or issue, there could be 8 to 10, 15 people who are directly impacted by that. So that's a really good takeout, and thanks for sharing that with us. I can't believe we've only got about 15 minutes left. Time has gone so quickly. Your responses have been absolutely outstanding. I want to bring into play now Kathy's husband. Remember their age. What are their dreams like? 3 years ago, they were getting ready for retirement, thinking about those things, having a pina colada, all the dreams that you work your working life through. And today, the world is very different. Scott is self-employed plumber and unfortunately has not been able to get much work for the business from the first lockdown. And he is spending his time going out and pretending that he's very busy. Kathy thinks he's drinking and doing other matters to fulfill his time. Scott doesn't know how to handle the business legalities of assessing people's properties or what to do to a large amount with regards to credit cards. And Kathy doesn't know about what he's doing there. What issues start to arise there? Rowan?
Yeah, Jim, unfortunately, Scott's not unique in turning to the bottle. We see from the numbers that about 1 in 5 Australians have increased their use of alcohol usage during the COVID pandemic. I think to the previous conversation we had with Dale about access to money, there is a risk there on the table whenever you have a dependency and credit card debts are rolling, that there is an exposure. So I think the questions Dale is asking is absolutely on point. We've got to be very careful in these sorts of dynamics. But certainly we're seeing, if we dig into the numbers a little bit deeper, it seems like about 15% of people are drinking more and 15% of people are drinking less. So the effects of the pressure from the pandemic sort of had a polarizing impact on people. So unfortunately not unique. Again, resources are excellent. They are available. In our case with TalkLink, we've got a few clinicians who specialize. One group tends to focus really on alcohol and another group can speak to a broader range of addictive patterns.
It must be very concerning for you to try and balance those particular behavioural aspects with what's happening in COVID. I mean, it's incredible. These stories have become so proliferate. There's so many of that, as you say, when you give us the stats. When we look at that, Catherine, what's going through your mind at this point in time? Because, Dale's rung you and spoken to you about what he thinks may be happening about the loan and so on. You're very concerned about ownership of the asset, particularly the house. Kathy doesn't know about these additional credit cards and different things. What's going through your mind? Where do you say, Kathy, I need to talk to you?
Okay, well, it's actually a topic I talk a lot about quite often, which is STDs, which is sexually transmitted debt. And it's probably occurring more than ever before. So just like with Scott, how many people don't know what credit cards their partner has? What Kathy probably doesn't realise is, if Jim can't pay it back and the bank comes for the house, it's going to be paid out. She will also be losing out. So one of the things, probably a discussion, and it's not really, but there would have to be a discussion about how much debt there is, and an honest discussion. And I don't think that's occurring a lot at the moment, because people are trying just to get through. I mean, and I think that's the mentality. I just need to get through to November when I can open, and it will all be better. But the problem is that you're carrying a whole lot of debt from prior lockdowns, and that's going to be a real concern going forward into next year, is how that debt's managed. There does need to be, if you're lending money to anybody, I don't care if it's your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, have an agreement in place. So I'd probably sit down with Kathy and with Scott, in their respective businesses, and do what we do as a legal risk analysis, go through, see, what the risks are, and then, work out a plan for them, because, debt is definitely going to be a major issue coming out of this, and how businesses, now there is something called safe harbors, but that actually finished. So, at the moment, we don't have the same, for this lockdown, businesses aren't being given the same, I'll say support, indulgement, graciousness that was given last year. So it's, if you think you've got a safe harbour from this one, you don't as a director.
And see, that's so critical to understand. But one of the things for our listeners and for everyone here, that's why structure is so important to understand. Joint tenancy and tenants in common, those particular matters, and ownership of that particular asset. And that's what I was trying to set a little bit of bait with regards to borrowing the funds, and it's only really for cash flow, but really all of that. So thank you for sharing that, Catherine.
Yeah, well, it's also the fact, if Kathy's on a lease and she's gone guarantor, the house, you need to understand what's at stake when signing these documents. And I think a lot of people in desperation are just trying to find money to get through. And, look, I would strongly recommend people, if you are carrying too much debt, to go and see an insolvent. There are restructuring, and Dale can probably talk about this more. There's restructuring options. The tax office is being, as I understand it, very accommodating to businesses. So I really would suggest people seek, that insolvency professional to help them restructure.
I think that's really good, Dale. How do you take that information that Catherine has spoken to you this morning at 8:30? How do you digest that, reflect it, and ring Kathy?
Yeah, really good question, Jim. And again, from our perspective, it's about understanding sort of the ecosystem of who's involved, what's at stake, who owes debt to whom, and seeing if there's what the restructuring teams would call a workout. It's important to understand that. It's important to potentially ring fence as much of the debt or the downside as possible, and see if we can get some separation. And then it's a matter of assessment as to whether or not there's advice around continuing to trade in the business or the risk of insolvent trading. It's a really complex issue. This is really only sort of skimming the surface, but there would be some detailed assessment that's needed.
Daryl? Daryl there?
Yeah.
Oh, good, thank you. Daryl, Liz has been concerned about her dad drinking. She just gets a hunch that he's drinking. In fact, she noticed on the right-hand side of the car, there was a big dent, and not real big, but, you know, just, you came home the other day and it wasn't there. Now it's there. And it was another sign of evidence that something happened, either accidentally or under the influence. She rings you and says, "Hi, I think Dad's drinking," and she's doing that because she's worried about her children in the car. He wants to take them for a drive and an ice cream. Nice thing to do. What happens?
Yeah, well, there's a few assumptions that are potentially being made, and we obviously deal in facts. So, you know, has he struck a pole? Was he over the limit? Was he not over the limit? But I think just out of concern, that's in the absence of any other information, that's certainly a conversation that we'd be happy to have with Dad around safety and responsible, but just being a responsible adult to obviously to make sure that there's no issues in that regard. But again, ultimately, we need all drivers on the road to self-regulate and do the right thing, regardless of scenario or otherwise. But certainly, if people are going to flout the laws, they run the risk and they will get caught. There's no question. It's just a matter of when. But certainly in the prevention space, we want to have that education conversation just to make sure that, you know, Dad is on board. He understands exactly what his legal implications are to him, the other road users, and his children as well. So his grandchildren. So definitely a conversation. And certainly something that we would take a deep interest in.
Thank you very much, Daryl. I really appreciate that. The final part is Scott's been offered a job with another plumbing company. He can't really decide whether he should take that or not. What does he do, Dale?
I think, Jim, what he really needs to do at this stage is sort of a comparison of his opportunities. So what is the opportunity like at this other plumbing business? Does it give him certainty of income and cash flow? Does it give him some opportunity just to rebound and get his sort of feet firmly on the ground again? And will he have the opportunity of starting his business up again? And what does that need? How much money does he need? How is he going to pay for some initial support, potentially some stocks? And it's just a matter of assessing and comparing the pros and cons of the two opportunities.
I think that's really good. Catherine, your thoughts to support Dale's comments?
Look, mine would just be to ensure that if he is breaching any contracts that he's currently already got, that he understands the implications of that. So, you know, if he's already contracted to do work, what does that look like? You know, I can't stress enough to all business owners to review their contracts, see if there's a what we call a force majeure or an out of your hands type clause in there to see if he can get out of those. It's also about, you know, does he look at, if he's already got existing clients, is a merge more of a thing that he might be looking at rather than a direct sale? You know, it's been difficult times for a lot of businesses, and I think decision making probably isn't at its greatest at the moment, and maybe what looks like a good opportunity may not be. You know, but in saying that, you know, I'm equal in this, is I think business owners are tired, and, you know, the thought of rebuilding is tiring to business owners, and it may give him the breathing space to get back on his feet. I mean, it's not just numbers are illegal, it's also then becomes, you know, mental health and your own health as well.
It's a really good segue to Juan, can you just tie up Darryl and Catherine's comments there? Because I think that's a really good segue again.
Yeah, some excellent points there. Look, ultimately, our fictitious Scott still potentially has a serious addiction. And to quote Professor Dan Lubman from the Turning Point at Monash Uni, we had him on our podcast, and he was the primary lead for SBS's documentary Addicted Australia, which I'd encourage everyone to check out. It's just a really deep Australian-based perspective on addictive patterns. Addictions are a solution to a problem. Scott still has some serious issues. He needs to resolve those, or else he may not stay in a job for long. He might find himself under the influence, potentially hurting himself or someone else. There's a broader issue here, and if he's seriously got an addictive issue, he needs to find the support to resolve that.
I think that's fantastic. And that's really interesting, because that seems to be, in my humble opinion, when I was reflecting upon it, an easy water flow, in the sense that it satisfies that, but what does it really create? I was really interested in it because it seems like a sentence by itself, but it has very severe implications for him as a person, to his partner, and to his daughter and grandchildren. There's a whole range of issues and dialogues there. I want to just try and sum up now with regards to our thoughts, and I'm going to let you just speak for a minute on your reflections of this process. We've been together nearly 90 minutes, and it's been really encouraging, very, very insightful. And I'm just going to really start from the top and work down, but leave Catherine to the end to sum up from her perspective. Darryl, would you please be so kind as to commence this process and reflections about thoughts going through your mind?
Oh, look, I think this discussion highlights that there are many legal, social, economic, financial issues in the community, which has been extrapolated by COVID. But the other message I think we're getting is that there are lots of supports that people can tap into. So that's one of the positives to come out of this. But certainly the challenges are there. From my perspective, we are an empathetic organisation. We understand that the community is doing it tough, but in our role, we're there to support them as best we can. And from my perspective, we're doing that every day. We do that through our emergency management arrangements. We're connecting with people. We're checking on people as we're out and about, just to make sure that they're okay. But certainly, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and I think we need to be positive. We need to be optimistic. But one of the other points was take control of what we can control, and move forward as best we can, and provide that support to each other, whether it be personal support or get the more formal professional support. Thanks, Jim.
Can I just say, Darryl, thank you on behalf of today's wonderful event, and also what you do for our community. We thank you for your leadership. It is outstanding, and I say that publicly. This is a public forum, and we encourage you to continue the great work, and thank all the New South Wales Police. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Rowan, please.
Yeah, I think what a strong note to take us down, Darryl. Take responsibility. Ultimately, you're in the driver's seat of your life. I think we touched on all the stresses out there and the great resources. I would point listeners and viewers to Lifeline, Beyond Blue, 1-800-RESPECT, and you can reach out to us at talklink.com.au, and we'll do our best to connect you in with a resource that matches your needs.
Ryan, again, on behalf of our principal digital age lawyers and Access, thank you for your contribution today. It has been immeasurable. I'm very grateful to have met you, and I know everyone will say the same when this is finished. Lyle had to go, something popped up, and he has so much on his plate, so I do understand the urgency when he has to go. Dale, a minute or so, a reflection, partner of KPMG.
Yeah, Thanks again, Jim. Look, it's been a really good session and you know, invaluable contributions from the panel, and thank you for the facilitation. I think the thing that stood out for me the most about the session is we know businesses are doing it tough. We get that. We are all people that are commercially minded. I think what we sort of are maybe less cognizant of is the ripple effects of the people behind the businesses.
Yeah.
And how in one really simple and fictional story, we dragged, you know, potentially 20 or 30 people into hardship. And I think as business leaders, you know, we talk a lot about this, but actually until you sit down and think through those ramifications and think through the impacts on real people and on how those impacts then have flow-on effects, you know, it's again eye-opening. But I completely agree with Daryl's sentiments. We've got a way out. You know, we are. You know, you can hear my accent. I'm natively South African. I know how tough other countries are doing it, and I know how blessed and privileged we are in Australia to have the frontline support and the law and order that we've got. So, you know, I think there's cause for quiet optimism, to be perfectly honest.
Dale, thank you for your contribution today. It's been invaluable, and I know that will be weaved into all the dialogue that was said and thought today. Most grateful personally and professionally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine, would you be so kind as to sum up? We're probably about 2 minutes over time. I'm very conscious
I'll be quick
of time.
for a lawyer.
Well, let's see.
Trust me. No, I just think one of the things that came out of today's panel is talk to experts. Okay, if you know, go on. You know, not everything on social media or anything on social media is fact. You know, you're a business owner. Inform yourself. You go and inform yourself about marketing. You go and inform yourself and start to be proactive in what you can do. You know, there are supports. There is so many resources out there. And if you know, so I would just say listen to experts. Okay, and make decisions for your business and for yourself, and stop listening to, you know, really what is a whole heap of white noise.
On behalf of Access and you, Catherine, digital age lawyers, I want to thank you personally and professionally for being supportive of this great event. It really has been informative. The people we've had today have been incredible, and I love the theme about really being proactive and get the right advice from the right people, the experts. Thanks for joining us this morning, and I wish you all the very best in your families, in your community, and the work that you do for our community. Good morning to all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Bye-bye, everyone.